surgery and all the other things that may be a part of their journey ahead, Lord, there would be the provision of your presence and your peace and, Lord, your intervention. We ask this in your name. God, we pray for our country. We love this country, Lord. Most of us have been born here. We were raised here. And for those of us who are perhaps newly landed here, Lord, we still cherish this land as our home and native land, Lord. And we pray for this country, Lord, at this troubled time. We ask, oh God, that, Lord, all across our nation, Lord, in the hearts of believers, they would be praying for our country, for our leaders, Lord, for our provinces, Lord, for every level of government, oh God, at this difficult time. I pray that we would emerge soon from this pandemic, Lord, and in time be stronger than we were previously. We ask these things, Jesus, in your name. Amen. You may be seated. We welcome you this morning. We thought we were recording our first service for online, but in reality, this will actually be our online service as well. So to those of you that are tuning in this morning online, we welcome you especially also. Behind the scenes, there have been people, there's always in every church, people behind the scenes, not visible, but at least most often that visible in what they do, but applying their giftings in various areas. And so I'm going to ask and invite us to come in a moment and serve on the Pastor's Council, but more recently is now chairing the Pastor Selection Committee, and she wants to come and share an update with you. Then right after that, we're going to move into the video announcement. And please.
Hey, everyone. Great. So, hi, thanks, Gary, for the introduction. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Ann Vitus. And as Gary said, I'm chairing the search committee right now. So, we had our first meeting, which went great. And now that we've begun to meet as a search committee, it's my role to come up and give you guys updates and keep you in the loop of what's going on. So at our first meeting, we met with Scott Doggart, who's our regional director, and he took us through the steps and the process that we're going to be going through as we begin the search for our next lead pastor. And so one of the first steps is to discern what we're looking for in our next leader. And so to do this, obviously, we need your input as a church. So we're going to be sending out a survey in 2 weeks. It's going to be open for 2 weeks. And it's basically where you can provide your input into the church's strengths and also areas you think we can grow. So please ensure that you have, or that we have your correct email address. But there's also going to be some hard copies available on the 27th here at the church, if that's easier for you. That's it from me, but if you do have any questions about the search process, you can email me at pastorscouncil@communitychurch.ca, or I'll try to be around most Sundays. Okay, thanks.
Hey, Community Church, it's Lorraine here, and I just have a few short announcements to share today. First off, we have been having so much fun at Community Days, and not just on Sunday mornings. We have been partying it up, COVID style. We have had messy parties, glow-in-the-dark parties, pizza parties, movie parties, birthday parties, all the fun parties, and we've had so much fun. But most importantly, all of these kids that are coming from the community and from our own church family, we've been telling them about Jesus. And it has been so amazing to see. Now, with this momentum in mind, we are hoping to start a Community Kids Midweek program in March. We have so many great ideas, but for it to run successfully, we need your help, Community Church. Will you help us? Will you give any of your time to your heart for kids, or just a big kid and just want to play some games or do some crafts? Email me at marika@communitychurch.ca. Also, our Bible study, it is starting in March. It was going to start on March 1st. so good. So if you're interested, email Jennifer at communitychurch.ca and she'll get you registered. Also, our service times wanted to remind everyone that we meet at the church every Sunday at 9 and 10:15, and we have kids ministry at both services. We also have nursery at 10:15. And starting today, February 20th, the kids will be joining us in the auditorium to worship. It is a big day, and we are so excited. For all those that join us online, you can find the video at 11:30 on our YouTube page. Also, for giving, I want to remind everyone that you can give on our website at communitychurch.ca. You can give on your online banking, and you can give here at the church. Alrighty, that's it for me. Let's hear a word from Pastor Gary.
I was saying in the first service that if there was ever a gift for giving announcements, I think Marika has it. I'm sure you could agree, and she just goes so well at that. And thank you, Marika, not just for that, but of course for caring for the children of Community Church so well. All right. Well, before I launch into this third and final message of this series, I want to just give you a little bit of a let's call it an infomercial for next week, starting next week. Today concludes the third and the final message in this series on Kingdom Lifestyle. Next Sunday, I want to turn the focus on prayer. And as I thought forward and kind of asked the Lord about what direction we should take for the weeks to come following this series, I just really felt the Lord steer me in the direction of a focus on prayer. So the question, what if, is clearly going to be answered by the passage we find in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. It's God's challenge to us. If my people, they're called by my name, will humble themselves and seek my face and pray, then I will hear from heaven and heal their land. And I'm sure you can agree, there's never been a time in my lifetime when I could say we need healing in our land as much as we do now. So, plan to join us starting next Sunday. Also next Sunday, as I mentioned, kids who wondered when we might sort of share in the Lord's table or communion again, starting next Sunday and each last final Sunday of each month, we're going to share communion together. And so at that time, if you're tuning in online, I'll just let you know that you may want to, prior to our sharing together in that service beginning next Sunday, you may want to just prepare some emblems and so on. You can also, if you want to swing by the church and pick up emblems that we provide here, you could do that as well. But plan to join us starting next Sunday for communion. Well, today we conclude the third and final message entitled Kingdom Lifestyle. And when I began this preaching series, I really felt that the Lord wanted us to focus on what kind of children of God's kingdom we're supposed to be. And there are certain lifestyles that ought to characterize our lives as children of God and children, of course, whom we serve, the King of Kings himself. And so, first Sunday we talked about kingdom of servanthood, or I should say lifestyle of servanthood, that every one of us, whether you have the gift of serving or not, are called to serve in some way or another. Last Sunday we talked about nurturing and cultivating a lifestyle of worship in our life. And I would add that I'm so grateful that our worship team really caught that and such a wonderful sense of God's Spirit last Sunday and again this Sunday as we gather together to worship God. Such an important part of what we do as we gather together as a faith community. It's also, however, worship is what we do together 7 days a week as well, not just that half an hour or so that we spend together on a Sunday morning. But today I want to talk to you about the lifestyle of stewardship. And I want to begin with a little story. And I probably should clarify, it's not a true story of two men that were out on a sailboat, and they capsized, and they fortunately swam to a nearby island, but the island was deserted. And so one man was pacing back and forth on the beach, and he was so distressed and worried and scared. But the other man was just laying back at the beach and sunning himself, kind of like he was in the forest. And so the first man said to the second man, "Aren't you afraid? Aren't you scared that we're going to die here? Nobody even knows we're here." And the first man, the second man rather, said, "No, I'm not worried at all. I make 10,000 a week, and I tithe faithfully to my church every week. And besides the stewardship month at my church, don't worry, my pastor will find me." Well, I hope I don't earn a reputation like that pastor did after talking to you about stewardship. In reality, my talk with you today about stewardship is only in part about money. And while it's an important part of stewardship, it is really only a facet of it. You may wonder, what is a steward exactly? Well, by definition, a steward is one who supervises or responsibly manages an organization or funds or property. And so I want to give to you, from a biblical background, the biblical principles of stewardship. And the first principle is this. Number one, it all belongs to God. All. Psalm 24, verse 1, couldn't express it more clearly. It says, "The earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants, belong to the Lord." Is that inclusive? Well, it really is, isn't it? It includes you and me and everyone else on earth. And by the way, everything else on earth. Let's remember that ownership is not the same as stewardship. So, your house, your car, your boat, your cottage, you may have and you should have a title deed or an ownership card, or maybe you have those keys in your pocket. But remember this, those things, those possessions are not yours. We need to remember that we're going to leave this life with exactly the same amount that we came in this life with. Nothing. Zero. So I don't know exactly where we ever got this idea that all we have is ours. And it's great that we work hard and we're diligent, and we understand that there are rewards for diligence at your job or your work. We understand there's fulfillment in our work. We hope so, at least anyway, for most of you. And part of that reward is that we are able to buy stuff, and we're able to provide some comfort for our life and so on. And there's no sin in that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But we have to recognize from the very beginning that all we have is ours, belongs to God. The second thing we realize is that God is generous. Clearly, in Scripture, we see over and over again the generosity and the goodness of God. We sang about it this morning. He is so good. He is so good to us. James chapter 1, verse 17 says this: "Every generous act and every perfect gift is from God, coming down from the Father of light. With him, there is no variation or shadow cast by turn." Now, so this builds on the principle that everything is God, everything belongs to God, but don't stop there. Because the truth is that God takes what he has, takes what is his, and he gives it generously. He is indeed a good God. And so when it comes to giving, God sets the bar high. He sets the example for how we should live our life as well. He gives generously. His gifts, we just read in James, his gifts are perfect. Now, how they function in life may not be perfect, but from the giver, they are perfect. So if you've been a Christian for 1 year or 50 years, you've seen what I'm talking about. Nothing stingy, nothing mindful about God. One of the wisest men that ever lived happened to be also one of the wealthiest people who ever lived, talking about Solomon. And so, as I prepared this message this past week, I thought it would be kind of interesting to compare Solomon's wealth with some of the wealthiest that we would recognize today in our generation. And so, I'm told, it's reported that the net worth of Bill Gates, of course the founder of Microsoft Software, has a net worth of somewhere about $130 billion. Warren Buffett, who is a well-known tycoon and entrepreneur, is reported to have a net worth wealth of approximately $115 billion, and Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, approximately $70 billion. Chump change, folks. May not sound like it, but compare this to Solomon. It's hard to translate antique currencies or ancient currencies into modern forms of currency, granted, but if we were to do so, the best we can estimate would be that the net worth of Solomon was approximately $2.2 trillion US. I'm saying in our first service that that's likely what the Canada national debt will be post-COVID. So get used to it. Get used to hearing those numbers. If you think I want to take any real time this morning talking about, prosperity and wealth and affluence and somehow, that Christians should drive the best cars and own the biggest homes and have the largest bank accounts and have the largest investment holdings, that's not where I'm going with this message at all. And again, I'm not saying that God is against any of those things. And I remind you, though, that God is generous because what he has, he gives freely. But whether you have plenty or whether you have just enough, all of us have the same responsibility to manage it well and to recognize that God is generous, and so that's a quality, the virtue that we should copy and emulate in our own life as well. The third principle is this, is that God expects good management. That's what stewards do, at least the good ones. They manage what they're responsible for. A couple of weeks ago in my first staff meeting with our staff, by the way, I really enjoy working with them. They're fun. They make my job easy. They make what I'm called to do for this temporary assignment enjoyable. I want to say that because they're really a joy to work with. But we went around the table and wanted to get to know staff a little bit better, and so I asked them, among other things, I said, look, who's your favorite Bible character? And we had a difference of opinions around the table, and I, at the time, mentioned David, but the reality is that one of my next favorite Bible characters is Joseph. I love who he was. I love his nature. I love his character. I love how he handled some of the very difficult, trying times in his life. And we pick up the story of Joseph as it relates to stewardship in Genesis chapter 39. And starting in verse 2, it says this. Follow with me behind you on the screen if you wish. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. And he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything that he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. And Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. And I want to underline these few words in that verse. And his master trusted him. So very much at the essence of what stewardship is. God trusting with what he gives us. Stewardship isn't a new concept, right? It's not even just a New Testament concept. In fact, stewardship really goes right back to Eden. So when God created Adam and Eve and placed them in the Garden of Eden, he carefully instructed them to oversee and to manage, aka steward, what he had created and what he had given to them. God is trusting each of us, God is trusting you to manage what he's given you and to manage it well. Jesus also taught a good deal on stewardship. From Matthew chapter 25, verse 21, Jesus uses a parable like he so often did to explain an important principle that he wanted his disciples to understand, that he wants us to understand. And in Matthew chapter 25, in verse 21, it says this. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Share your master's joy. Jesus, again, was using a principle to help us understand an important kingdom principle. Now, on the surface, it's pretty easy to understand. We are to manage what is given us. Do it as well as we know how. To be diligent, to be responsible. And if we do so, we will be entrusted with more. Now, it may just be my own opinion, so I'll say that at the get-go, but it may possibly be, this parable may well explain why some Christians are blessed with much and some are blessed with much less. And while that's probably not the whole answer, it is my opinion that sometimes, I believe, it underlies the fact that God can't trust just everyone with great wealth. In fact, probably God can't trust very many at all with great wealth, because with great wealth comes great responsibility. I've known in the past, more than 40 years in ministries of various kinds that I've brushed up against or pastored some very wealthy people. They've done well for themselves. They were prosperous. They were successful in business or in their companies or in what they owned and how they managed it and how they stewarded and so on. And I recognize that in spite of all the trappings they might have had, the big home and nice vehicles and so on, with their wealth came great responsibility. Wow. Jesus talked about this in Luke chapter 12, verse 48. He said, to whom much is given, much is required. Now that in itself is not rocket science. It's pretty simple. It's not complicated at all. Maybe, though, a little harder to understand, to the point I almost want to try to avoid this because it gets a little bit more complicated, is the end of Jesus' parable as we read on in Matthew 25. And so in verse 29, Jesus went on to say, for to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have more than enough. But from the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. I would put this verse in the category of one of the hard sayings of Jesus. This wasn't the first time Jesus taught some hard teachings or hard sayings. He said more than a few. And one day, if I end up being here long enough, I may even do a series on the hard sayings of Jesus. But know this is surely one of them. And because on the surface, this passage could very easily be mistaken or misread or misunderstood. It could be read as the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Taken out of context, it could possibly sound like that. But if you fit this passage, what Jesus is trying to tell us, into the full and proper context of Jesus' teachings in this parable, it really comes down to responsibility. Good management. Sound stewardship of all that God gives us. So the one that is slothful or careless or irresponsible with what they've been given, that which they have will be taken from them. In reality, it probably will just go. They will lose it. And I know there's plenty of examples of bad and irresponsible stewardship in our postmodern world today. How about the environment? And I won't camp down a long time here, but it really probably commands a whole message in its own right, which I won't do so today. But in the next frame, you'll probably wonder what this is. Well, this is known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Pretty, isn't it? You're only seeing a small, tiny little part of it in this image, but the reality is it spans 1.7 million square kilometers in the South Pacific. So it's twice the size of Texas. And by the way, this isn't the only garbage patch out there in the ocean. So in the North Pacific and also in the the North and South Atlantic, there are garbage patches, some of them even larger than this one. There are other bad examples of stewardship. Nations of our world managed by poorly managed political leaders. Our world economies by the greed and the corruption of high-level CEOs, giving themselves huge bonuses or extravagant expense accounts, and while the working class just struggle to make ends meet. All examples of stewardship have gone bad. We saw some of that in the country that we were called to, a nation. It's common in third world countries like Cambodia that neighboring countries and even other prosperous countries of the world, they provide some financial help. Maybe support their infrastructure or to help in their urban areas or to prop up their infrastructure, maybe build a bridge and so on. I heard while we were there of the example of the Japanese government donating $23 million to Cambodia to build a badly needed bridge over the Mekong River. It would have been more than ample to do the job, but the problem is that when it was received, it was siphoned off by each of the high levels of government in Cambodia until when it finally came down to what was left, it was about $2 to $3 million. Imagine what the bridge looked like about that. Bad stewardship. Bad stewardship. The fourth principle I want to touch on is that stewardship is really about more than money. If all you ever give of yourself is your money, then you've really missed the point. You've missed the point badly. Because you fail to understand what true biblical stewardship is really about. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10 puts it this way: based on the gift that each one has received, use it to serve others as good managers, we could say stewards, of the varied grace of God. Good managers are responsible stewards. So, I said this morning in our first service, and I repeat again in our second service, with no exaggeration, I am not flattering you here this morning. But there is a treasure trove of gifts in this church, Community Church Florida. Even in this room this morning. There are a whole variety of different gifts. Some of them you see. They've been used this morning. Our worship team, our audiovisual team, our Marika in children's ministry, and those who volunteer along with her, and a whole host of other people. Some of them are not so visible, and they're behind the scenes, and they're using their gifts as well. You might say, well, Pastor, you're new here. How could you possibly know that? I know that because, not only because of the years I've served in ministry, but because 1 Peter couldn't be more clear. We all have a gift. Each one has received, Peter said. And you know what? Our gifts from God are supposed to define who we are. They're unique. So you may have the same gift as someone else in this church, but somehow God gives it to you in such a way that it is unique to you. That no one uses that gift that God gave you in exactly the same way, even if they have a similar gift. It's amazing, isn't it? Now, some of you have multiple gifts. You may have several gifts. Some only one or two. And you ask why. I'm not going to tell you. Because I don't know. It's one of those questions that you might have to ask God one day. It's one of those questions that perhaps God only knows the answer to, and that's okay, because the giver doesn't always have to say why he gives some gifts and some other gifts. But maybe even more important, you might be sitting there this morning and say, well, Pastor, I don't have any gifts. I don't think I have any gifts. I don't know what I can do. Well, let me tell you this. Let me assure you this morning, you do have gifts. You may not know what they are. You may not have discovered yet what they are, but you do have gifts. And here's the thing about gifts. Gifts are practical, highly practical, so they are most often connected to our likes and passions, to that certain bent that all of us have, that unique so if you can answer that question honestly, then you're well on your way to discovering your gifts and what you have to offer. In our staff meetings, we've been talking about pulling together gifting surveys that are a helpful way of helping to kind of mine out the gifts that are here in community church, especially in the lives of those who have gifts and maybe are not using them or don't know what they are. And so in the coming weeks, be patient with us, but we're going to ply you with a few surveys along the way. And we may just send them out to you by email or email blast, or we may just hand them out hard copy in our gatherings in the weeks to come. But we'd really like you to know and understand what your gift is if you really don't know yet. And some of you who are using gifts may have other gifts, and you're not aware that you may have other multiple gifts in your life as well. All of these are God's gifts. And they're intended by the giver to keep on giving. So it might be serving, or it might be teaching, or it might be worship leading, or it might be caring for seniors, or it might be children's ministry, or prayer ministry, or maybe 100 other gifts of all kinds. But you have a gift. You do. And all of us, because of the gift that God has given to us, are to be stewards of that gift. Stewards of our time and our talents and our abilities and our skills and our opportunities as well, because God surely gives to each of us opportunities. Here's what I've learned. God wants all of you. Yeah. Fair that he should ask that of us, but he wants all of us. Your abilities, your time, your talents, he wants all of it. And when he has it, he gives it back to us over and over and over again because he's so very generous. All right. So, I said up to now that I wouldn't spend all my time talking about money, but I am going to take some time now. Because the reality is, stewardship is also about money. So there, I said it. I got it out there. So indulge me for just a few moments as I talk about this facet of stewardship as well, because it really is an important part of us being a manager of what God gives us. And hear this, people. I've heard all the rants through the years. I really have. From both outside of the church by unbelievers and so on and onlookers, as well as inside. The church always wants your money, or preachers are always begging for money, or how about the famous, for your gift of $100, we want to send you this ballpoint pen that was crafted in Israel and is made of 2,000-year-old olive wood. That sounds sarcastic. Maybe just do it a little better. Or better still, a vial of living water from the Jordan River. Well, I've been to the Jordan River, folks, and it's just H2O. It really is. It's just plain, ordinary water, just like any other river water. It's clean, it's clear, it's true, but it's just water. There's nothing magical or mystical or even holy about it. Even if you're baptized in the Jordan River. As beautiful as the experiences that may have been for you. So I'm not gonna add to those rents. I'm not gonna answer to those rents. But I do want to point you this morning to what God really tells us on the matter. And from Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9, it clearly gives us instruction on that. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first produce of your entire harvest. Maybe I should have put that in Message translation because that's a little antiquated, isn't it? The first fruit of your harvest. It sounds like you're going to come and present your grains and your livestock and your cattle and your sheep and so on, because that's actually in the day in which this was written, in the pre-New Testament days, it was written in the book of Proverbs. That's what people did. Actually, they didn't often always come with currency. They came with what they could offer, and they would offer the first fruits of their harvest. Well, we don't do that in the 21st century, not that I know of. So if I come to the office this week and you come with a sheep or a cattle or a bushel of grain or apples, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. But, nor am I going to spend any more time this morning talking about percentages or numbers or maybe even the messed up motives that sometimes are a part of giving to God. You know, this motive of, you know, you give to God so he can give back to you. I don't really have a lot of interest in going there today. Because I think there's a higher principle here. I think there's something higher and better that the Lord wants to teach us about this matter of giving of what God has given to us, our money and our substance. I was saying in the first service that we, in the interim period between the last time that I served as an interim pastor and this current interim assignment, that I served in Crossroads Currents. And for a good number of months, I was on phone lines. We manned them from home with earphones and tie into an internet platform and so on, and we received calls from all over North America. In fact, we received as many calls from the U.S. as we do from Canada. But what I noticed is this. I noticed that most of the calls were genuine, they were sincere needs, and people needed prayer for one thing or another, and it was a privilege to be able to come alongside them and pray in faith, believing and agreeing together with their needs. But more often than I even ever expected, and I can't put it down as a percentage, but frequently I would get these calls, people praying for one prayer for a financial miracle or for abundance. In some cases, they use the term a wealth transfer to me as an heir of the kingdom. You know, that doesn't really preach well to me. I would listen to it. I would pray for them. I wasn't praying for wealth transfer. I was praying that their needs would be met and that God would be sufficient to their needs, but I wasn't praying for them to win lottery tickets, folks. My experience is this. God does bless us as we determine to honor him in our giving. And I know my wife and I both could say without reservation or exaggeration at all that God has blessed us more than we could ever imagine as we simply endeavor to honor God and his work. So good practical money management for a believer begins with giving. Through the years of pastoring, I sometimes would counsel people who came to me and they had, I would say, in some cases, a genuine financial crisis. They were in fear of losing their home. They were wondering whether they should declare bankruptcy for their business. They were unable to pay their bills. I remember one person saying, you know, I don't know what I have to pick out of a basket the bills I'm going to try and pay this month because I can't pay them all at the same time. And so I would endeavor to counsel them, sometimes in depth, but most often my counseling came down very simple, practical steps. It's like a three-part. Give at least a tenth. Save at least a tenth. And live responsibly within your means and capacity. It's simple. But you know what? It works. It really does. And here's what you need to understand. God's economy is so very different from any other. So maybe it doesn't make fiscal sense in the world of finance. But you know what? It does work. That when you honor God, you make it the first part of what you receive in your income and what you receive, and God gives you some amazing way to be able to manage well on what remains. And I've never been able to really figure it out. It's not a science. It's God's economy, and it works. And I've seen many more people who, through the years, made way more income than we did. And barely managed it. Struggling. Deep in debt on various times. We have our part to play. We need to be good stewards. Obviously, we need to manage what we do. We need to be careful about debt and all those things and so on. But giving is a big part of that picture. Paul elaborates on the principle that Jesus first talked about, the principle of sowing and reaping. And this is what he said. Remember this, because Paul is actually referring to Jesus' teaching on this. Remember this, the person who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And the person who sows generously will also reap generously. So each person should do as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly, not out of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. Here's the thing. You know what? It's kind of like serving as well. It's not what we have to do, it's that we get to do. It's a privilege to be able to contribute to the work of God on this planet, or in our community, or around the world, as we contribute to those who are taking the gospel to the unreached peoples of the world, or the poor nation. It's our privilege to do so. And this is such profound and clear teaching from Jesus, and echoed here by Paul. It's actually a lesson from nature, isn't it? A simple lesson from nature. Don't expect to reap anything in the fall if you don't plant anything in the spring. And for that matter, don't expect to receive a harvest of grain if you plant fruit. I mean, the lessons are simple because they are lessons from nature. So you might be asking, what about tithes and offerings and how much and so on? You may have noticed I'm deliberately trying to avoid that whole debate. And here's the reason why. Because I kind of think that if a Christian has to ask, should our tithe be 10%? Is it off our gross income or our net income? Lord help us. I think we missed the point. I think there's a higher principle here. I think if you want to talk numbers, I think 10% is a good start. But I think that if you really want to see God multiply and be a sustaining influence in your finances and what God has given to you, then giving is a big part of that as well. So we can make it a duty. We can do that. Or we can make it something that is one of the celebrated principles of our life to be able to do. God is generous, we said before. How can we be otherwise if we're really going to reflect his ways? I came across this quote by James L. Kraft. You'll recognize the last name, I'm sure. And if you like peanut butter like I do, then you'll know the name Kraft because nobody makes better peanut butter than Kraft. Maybe in my opinion. Or maybe you're a KD lover. All right, that could be too. But James L. Kraft was actually born in Ontario. Then in his early 20s, migrated to the U.S., where he became a wealthy businessman and founded Kraft Industries that produce all kinds of food. And this is what he said. He was, by the way, a very devout believer, follower of Jesus. He said, the only investment I ever made, which has paid consistently increasing dividends, is the money I have given to the Lord. Wow. A multi-billionaire. I will say this much. I think I belong to where you make a commitment to local church so that it can do the work of God in that community. I believe that. Offering? Well, you know what? There's lots of things you can do. Worthwhile. And you need to find out what that is. I think you need to pray what that might be. I may have mentioned a figure earlier, but it's not the 11th commandment, folks. It's just a starting point. There's many other ways to give, many other ways to sow. There are dedicated, called people, global workers like we were at a season in our life, that are taking the gospel to other nations, to unreached peoples of the world. There are reputable Christian charities that are ministering to the needy, to the homeless, to the widows, to those who are suffering in one way or another. And I think the person needs to ask, what part are you playing that? You can't get all of them. Of course you can. And I get a large number of mail. I still get snail mail coming in my mail. And I also get my inbox loaded with all kinds of different appeals for one thing or one charity, one ministry, and another. We can't support them all. And we don't try. But prayerfully, we have chosen ministries and people to invest in through the years, and we consider it a privilege to be able to do so. I think we all need to consider doing that. We live in a very wealthy nation. even middle-class people, or middle or upper middle-class people in our society in Canada live at a higher level than royalty did in the pre-New Testament period. We are wealthy, and you know what? One day God may well judge the wealthy nations in the world for the neglect of the starving in the third world and the needy. So we all have a part to play. Sowing and reaping. Sowing and reaping. Would you raise me? Would you pray with me? Father, we thank you so much. We're so very, very grateful. We thank you, Lord, for all that you have blessed us with. Lord, we sang a moment ago, you have been so good to us. So very good. And we've seen your goodness extended to us, Lord, in giving to us, Lord, abundantly gifts to you, to get out there and to engage in your work, Lord, the work of God in our world today. And we thank you that you have given to us, Lord, means to meet our own needs and our family needs. We thank you for the homes we live in, and the vehicles we drive, and the food we eat, and clothing to wear, and all the other things, Lord, that fill out and add to our life. Lord, you call us to be stewards. You call us as kingdom children to be good managers of what you give us. Help us to do that, Lord, we pray. Help us to do so, Lord, I pray, with a sense of joy and privilege, Lord, rather than a sense of entitlement or a sense of duty, oh God. Lord, we just give thanks to you now for all that you've done, all that you've provided, and we give you praise in Jesus' name. Amen. God, we've gone later than normal. We apologize. We had a little bit of a glitch in between our first and second service, which we resolved, and so this was actually a recorded service. But thank you for being with us this morning. For those of you that have tuned in online, we hope that you're able to hear us. And next Sunday, please remember communion in both services, and then also begin this year's prayer. So God bless you. Have an awesome week, and take care.